To begin, International Sales Manager and Promotional Manager for the Mauritshuis, Simone Holland, has offered a warm welcome and introduction to the museum, so I'm going to play that for you now.
A warm welcome from the Mauritshuis. My name is Simone Holle and I'm Manager International Sales for this beautiful museum. The Mauritshuis, a royal picture gallery, is located in the city center of The Hague, the historical and political heart of the Netherlands. We are a small, world-class museum with a fantastic collection of Dutch and Flemish paintings from the 17th century, the golden age of this type of art. In the Mauritshuis you will discover iconic masterpieces, such as The Girl with the Pearl Earring by Johannes Vermeer and The Anatomy Lesson by Dr. Nicolaas Tulp by Rembrandt, which attract hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world to our museum every year. This year we have something unique to celebrate: 200 years of inspiration. The Mauritshuis, once built in the 17th century as a residence for Count Johann Maurits van Nassau-Siegen, became a museum in 1822. Our anniversary year was kicked off festively with an enormous quantity of flowers. Our first celebration exhibition in full bloom, is presenting the most beautiful flower still lifes from the 17th century. Together with the opening of the exhibition in full bloom, the museum's facade and forecourt are transformed, as you can see here, into a sea of flowers. The Mauritshuis building itself will be adorned with sustainable imitation flowers throughout the year. More will be added every few weeks until our building is hidden behind the best bouquet. From June, our next celebration exhibition will be on display. Flashback. Contemporary famous Dutch photographers such as Anton Corbijn and Rineke Dijkstra became inspired by the 17th century Mauritshuis paintings. Their photographs will be displayed among the paintings of the old masters here at the Mauritshuis. We conclude our celebration year with a special exhibition starting in October. Paintings from the Frick collection in New York. These paintings left Europe for America more than 100 years ago and have never been seen in Europe since. Very exceptionally. The Frick collection is lending them to us. Among them is Rembrandt's famous self-portrait from 1658. Apart from our exhibitions, we have many anniversary events and activities. For example, a street art project, a new Mauritshuis book with the title Pen Meets Paint, and also school projects. Our museum is a house filled with stories. If these walls could talk, the moment you enter the Mauritshuis, you start experiencing the love for these old masters and our drive to share the history and stories behind them in a modern and inspiring way. In a few moments, you will be able to discover this for yourself. My colleague and art historian Wendy Fossen will guide you, digitally of course, through our museum and will show you our highlights in our Gigapixel museum. I wish you a pleasant visit to the online museum guided tour, and I hope you will in the future meet the girl with a pearl earring live in The Hague at the beautiful Mauritshuis.
All right, Wendy, take it away.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much, Dustin. I already saw some questions popping up in the chat about the background of Dustin. That's actually the other side of the museum that you see that Simone is talking to you from. So that's the exactly. Thank you very much, Dustin. So that's the other side of the museum that you just saw for Simone's introduction, and that's. Yeah, it's a beautiful view from the lake. There's a small lake in front of it. And on the right-hand side, you see our governmental buildings, because The Hague is our city of government. So it's not the capital, but it's the city of government. But Enough about The Hague. We're going to go to the museum. Thank you very much, Dustin, for clearing the screen there for me. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to take you to the Mauritshuis, and I have to go in this room. So here you see the hallway, just behind the doors that Simone was talking to you from, and I'm going to take you on this tour. It takes about 45-50 minutes, as Dustin said correctly. If you just let me talk, I'll just talk for hours. I can no longer see any questions popping up in the chat, so Dustin will take care of that. And if there's any really important questions, that then he will ask me. But for the most, you can just leave them in the chat and we'll get back to you on them as well. I want to explain two things first. We have the founder of the actual house, and we have the founders of the collection. Those are two different groups, basically. First of all, we have the founder of the house, and that's the person that you see here, Johann Maurits von Nassau-Siegen. And by clicking this little portrait, I'm actually zoomed in on his painting, but I'm just going to zoom out again, and I'm going to introduce him to you. As I said, he is called Johann Maurits von Nassau-Siegen, which means that he is related to the stadtholders at the time who were of the Nassau family, the Orange Nassau family. And he was one of 25 children, not, of course, with the same wife, but he had 24 other siblings, and he was somewhere in the middle, so he had no chance whatsoever to get an inheritance or something. So he had to get a job himself, and he went into the Dutch army. There he, of course, being related to the stadtholder, he quickly promoted, but he also appeared to be a very good strategic soldier. So he was asked at a certain point to go to Brazil and to take over the sugar trade from the Portuguese. Of course, not just like that, but he had to fight for it. The reason they sent him over there was basically that they wanted to open a second front in the Dutch War of Independence, the 80 Years' War. But of course, also because they wanted to get their hands on the sugar trade at that time. He accepted this offer, quite unusual for a nobleman to go so far abroad, also running the risk of just simply dying on the ship over there. But he did, because he needed the money, because he had purchased this plot along the pond, the little lake that you just saw on the picture, and he didn't have enough money to actually finish the project that he had in mind. And the project was designed, the whole building is designed by Jacob van Kampen, and he is the very same designer of the Dam Palace in Amsterdam. So when you are on a Touw trip and you go to Amsterdam, you see both the large palace, and when you come and visit us, you see the other work, or one of the other works, by this very same architect. So he simply didn't have enough money, so he took up the offer to go to Brazil to take over the sugar trade over there, an important occurrence in our history, because from that moment onwards we were drawn into the slave trade. Before that, the Dutch Republic hardly was part of that, but he had to keep the sugar mills going, so he needed manpower, and the only way you could get the manpower was by enslaving people and transporting them from West Africa to Brazil. So here in The Hague, people knew very well where the money came from, because they called this house the Sugar Palace, and they knew that it was funded by the sugar mills and by all the work all these poor enslaved people had done. Johann Maurits, and when I zoom in, you see that he's wearing this armor, him being a soldier, of course. When he came back, the house was finished, and he tried to get higher on the social ladder. So therefore, he donated a lot of his collection of artworks that had been created in Brazil to the Danish king. And for that, he received what you see over here. This is a sash and it contains, or there's hanging onto it, clinging onto it, a small elephant, a white elephant. And as you can see, I can zoom in pretty closely here, where you don't see the elephant that that well anymore. When I zoom in, it becomes more apparent. But this elephant is the Order of the White Elephant, and he was given that by the Danish king. So here we have Johann Maurits, who founded the house. When I close this screen again, it will bring me back to the main hall, and we'll zoom in on the guy that you see here, and he is one of the stadtholders of the late 18th century. They started collecting the collection. So it is this guy, William V, and his father, William IV, and the then following king, and I won't bother you with all the Dutch history things, it's very complicated, but his son actually became King William I. So these three guys formed the collection, and they called it the Royal Cabinet of Paintings, the Mauritshuis, and that's the official name of this museum. So it's a royal cabinet. It was collected by the royals. So here we have the two people who were, or two of the people who were, who are related to this house. I'm going to start here, or take you further down into this room here, which is what we call the golden room. And I'm just going to take this the quick way. Here you can see the elevator that we use to get our less able guests up in the museum. And here you see that beautiful golden room. And it's called golden because of the golden decorations that you see lining the walls. And also it is decorated with beautiful paintings by Giovanni Antonio Pellegrini, a Venetian painter who was specialized in interior decorations. And this all dates back to the 18th century, because in 1804, there was a large fire in this house, and unfortunately, it destroyed the entire interior. So everything that Johann Maurits had done in terms of decoration has been lost, or is lost now because of the fire. And fortunately, they decided after a few years, debating what to do, they decided not to tear the whole building down, but just simply redecorate the whole thing and renovate the whole thing. And that is where we ended up with this beautiful room. And it has also ceiling paintings, as you can see here, but that makes you a bit dizzy when you look at that. So this is all decorations from 1804, of 1818, then it was finished. We are a small museum, a relatively small museum, but we have all the great masters that you can also find in the Rijksmuseum, for instance. And one of my colleagues, she always says, we're the smallest of the great museums and the biggest of the smallest museums. So we are small, but we have all the great masters. We have Rembrandt, we have Vermeer, we have Jan Steen, and quite a number of others. We are basically a 17th century art museum, focusing on Dutch, but also Flemish art, but mainly Dutch art. But I want to take you now to one of the Flemish paintings first. So these two rooms here, I hope you can see my mouse here in the left-hand button where you can, or left-hand corner, where you see that I can actually press all these little photographs, and that brings me straight into these rooms. So this is one of the rooms lining the stairway, and you can see that when I move around here. You can see here the front door, the official front door, which is of course not used for us, any of us. It's only in use for royalty, for instance. Kate Middleton actually came through that door. The painting that I want to show you now here is the Garden of Eden with the Fall of Man, and I can zoom in with this little camera again, and I'm gonna, it automatically zooms in, but I don't want that, so I'll have to zoom out again. And here you see a painting by Peter Paul Rubens and by Jan Bruegel, and this is quite extraordinary, but not so extraordinary. It happened more often, that we have two great masters actually working together on one painting, and it just enhanced the desirability for such a painting, because you get like two masters for the price of one, basically. Well, I wouldn't say price of one, but you know, you have two great masters working in one same painting. This was something that Rubens and Bruegel did more often. We know about 30 paintings of them working together, so this collaboration was quite fruitful. Rubens was responsible for Adam and Eve and the rest, and the horse. Yeah, I shouldn't forget that, and the horse, and the rest of the landscape together with all the animals. That was done by Bruegel. And I always imagine that, you know, that Bruegel actually set up the painting, and then it went to Rubens, who painted then Adam and Eve, and then it just was carried through Antwerp again back to the workshop of Bruegel, and then Bruegel finished the whole thing. And the nice thing about this application is that sometimes you get this little eye here, and when I zoom in to a specific area of the painting that I want to show you more in detail, I zoom in here on the cat, and you see that the leg of Eve was painted first, and that the ear of the cat just is overlapping the leg. And when I go to the infrared image of this particular painting, I can actually show you that even better. So that is one of the wonderful things of this application, that in some cases you actually get close, so close that you actually go underneath the paint and have a look at the infrared image underneath. And here you can see that he has also been kind of, you know, not doubting about the dogs, how to paint the dogs. You see here the drawings, the under drawings, that he kind of changed them in the final version of the painting. So when I move back to the normal view again, then you see nothing of all these drawings that were underneath that you just saw. What of course is also so fantastic is that you get so incredibly close to the painting, something that you will not be able to do, of course, in the museum, because then the museum guards and also me as a tour guide would, or as a museum docent, would be extremely nervous when you get so close. But you get really, really close here. You see all the beautiful details, also the details of how things are painted, and the, you know, the fur of the animals, but also the expression on the faces. And I would like to draw your attention to this part of the painting, and that you actually see here that I don't want to offend anybody, but I always tend to say, you know, especially with school groups, this is the moment when the shit hits the van, basically, because that's the moment that Eve is handing the apple, and that's, you know, by him accepting the apple and both eating from the apple, the result is that they are thrown out of paradise, and that leaves us, you know, in the world that we live now. If they hadn't eaten that apple, we would all be walking around in paradise. And the interesting thing about this painting is that you see that Rubens painted this this moment where Adam is actually doubting whether he should take the apple. You see him, when you look at his face, he's looking up at Eve, and he's gesticulating here with his hands. He's pointing at the apple, and he's basically asking Eve, you know, should we do this? God said we shouldn't eat this apple, so why are you giving me this apple? And he's doubtful whether he should follow her lead. And that's something which is very interesting in this painting, because we all know that he does, but we also know that when you look at this line, this line here, the apple from the hand of Eve moving to the apple over here, and then continuing this line to the corner here, what do we see there? We see a monkey, and this monkey is also eating an apple. So what these painters are doing here is that they're taking the mickey out of Adam. They're kind of saying, you know, you're like a monkey. You're copying the behavior of Eve. If you had been a man, and that's easy for me to say as a woman. I mean, we always get the guilt from, handing Adam the apple because we're all Eve. But basically, Adam had a choice. And that is what you see depicted here in this painting. He had a choice, but he chose to copy the behavior of Eve, and he took the apple. So that's how we end up being thrown out of paradise. And this is, of course, a religiously oriented painting in a still very Catholic environment. In the Flemish territories, they were Catholic, and the Dutch Republic had become Protestant. So this is something that worries the Catholics. But also these painters have added some reference to the reassurance, because when you zoom in here, you see that there is something in the tree that doesn't really belong there, because this is an apple tree. And here you see all of a sudden a bunch of grapes. You see more grapes here, and there's a grapevine here. And then you know, okay, no worries, even though this has happened, there will be redemption, because the grapes, they from grapes you make wine. And then I tend to ask the group, what do we use wine for? And then many people, of course, say, well, to drink and be merry. Yes, but also this is a reference to the blood of Christ. So this is all about the crucifixion and the Eucharist, and the fact that that Christ has died on the cross in order to fix all this, what happened here. So this is a reassurance for those people who were looking at this painting and got extremely worried about what was happening over here. So this is a bit of symbolism that you find in many of the 17th century paintings. Well, having said that, I'm going to take you upstairs, and I'm going to just to give you an idea again. So we just came from this room here, and we're walking up the stairs here now, like that, and I'm going to take you to the second floor.
Hey, Wendy, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure.
There was a question here before you went into the detail of the painting about the fire in 1804 that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And were any paintings lost in that fire?
Yes, everything was lost, because you have to bear in mind that, and that's what I try to explain, that all the paintings that you see here do not belong to Johann Maurits. They did not belong to the house. This was all gathered later on in time, and it hadn't been, so the fire took place 100 years before we turned into a museum. So what was destroyed was the entire interior decoration, and we only know from a number of letters and reports, basically, of travel logs that people had written about the fact that they had visited Johann Maurits, of what the house looked like. And we know that there have been some frescoes of volcanoes, of Brazilian imagery, and it was a very exotic house from the interior. The outside is what we call Dutch classicism, so that was very much fashionable of the day, but the interior was quite different from what we see now. So no, you don't need to worry. None of these paintings were there yet, so nothing was destroyed apart from the fixed interior of the house, which is of course a disaster, because we would love to have seen the real decoration of Johann Maurits's house, but we simply have just fragments of information on that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and while you're in here, someone just asked, what is that painting on the ceiling in this room?
Oh, yeah, well, it's Dustin and I, and when we did the rehearsal, we talked about this as well. It's something that we got stuck with to say, because I don't really fancy this, but this is of the 1980s. Every time in those days when you were renovating a building, and we had a renovation in the 1980s, you had to dedicate 1% of your building sum to art, and of course it had to be like contemporary art. So this is by a contemporary artist. And actually, it's by the same artist who has decorated also one of the palaces where the queen used to live and the king now. So we're finding ourselves in good company. So we share the same artist in our ceiling as the royals do. And it's like a reference because this artist was very proud to be asked to do this, of course, because now his work as a modern artist is kind of joining all these great 17th century masters. And he shows a bit of his vanity here, his own glasses that you see here. I can't get much closer than it gets a bit of in an angle. So you see the glasses here, and the bit that you see here and also here, they look like wings, and it's about Icarus who who got the wings, the wax wings from his father Daedalus, and he said, don't fly too close to the moon because your wings will melt. And he was getting, as young people do, sometimes they get over enthusiastic, and he was flying too close to the sun and his wings melted, and he just fell from the sky and died. So this is about vanity, about taking chances as well. So that is what you see here. And this is another part of it as well. This is about the working life of men. This is a pair of jeans. This is a jam sandwich, a jelly sandwich, and this is a spade. So this is about the working man. So it's a lot of symbolism as well, as you can see in the 17th century masters. Any more questions, Dustin?
Nope, that's it for now. Thanks, Wendy. We can keep rolling.
You're welcome. Don't worry. And then I'll continue the tour here, and we're going to go into this room, and we'll face immediately this beautiful painting by Rembrandt. And this is the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicolaas Tulp, as you can see popping up when I press this little camera. And again, it will then immediately zoom in. So we're going to zoom out again. Here, when you press this one, you get the information button here. As you can see, it's painted. It's an oil on canvas painted in 1632. And there's a lot of other information. Of course, you can, Dustin will, I don't know whether it's already up, but the link will be shared as well to this 3D virtual museum. So
yes, I'll place that into the chat for everyone towards the end of the presentation.
Okay, excellent. Anyway, so we have here a painting by Rembrandt. He's only about 25, 26 years old when he paints this. He's just moved to Amsterdam, and he's asked by this guy here, Dr. Nicolaas Tulp, to paint him a group portrait. Dr. Nicolaas Tulp is a surgeon, and he's performing this anatomy lesson in the company of of a group of other surgeons, and they all paid to be in this painting. So it's not just paid by Dr. Nicolaas Tulp, but also by the guys that you see here. Of course, this guy didn't pay because he died, and he is also a criminal, because only criminals were used for anatomy lessons, because we were kind of in the middle of, people were in a split position, basically. On the one hand, it was really still very religiously oriented, but on the other hand, science had kind of increased. So people started to explore things more and more, and they in terms of anatomy lessons, they wanted to know and see what a body looked like inside, but you just couldn't cut up anybody. It just had to be a criminal, because they still believed in the resurrection, or the last day of judgment, that everybody would climb from their graves and be resurrected again. But criminals were sent to hell straight away, immediately anyway, so they didn't need a body anymore. So therefore it was allowed to use criminals for these kinds of this kind of research. And the guy that you see here, we know of him, we have his name. His name is Aris Kind, and he had been punished numerous times. So he had been flogged, he had been beaten, he had been branded, and he had lost his right hand. because, you know, in those days, you didn't just go to prison, you were just convicted and the punishment was performed straight away, and then you could go again. So no jails or anything. So also in this case, he had stolen something, so his hand was cut off and he was sent away again. Very efficient, I think. Anyway, so the thing is that Rembrandt always painted basically what you see is what you get. So when you have your portrait made by Rembrandt and you have this big wart on your face, you would get the wart on your portrait, even though you asked him not to, because he said, well, this is you, so you get the wart. And by leaving out all the scars on this body and also adding the hand, although he did that in a second instance, he at first he didn't paint the hand, but he changed his mind and then added the hand. So we see this white body without any scars, and that was something that was quite extraordinary for Rembrandt, because as I explained, he usually painted, you know, what you see is what you get. But this was requested strongly, or at least, well, he just said, I want you to pay attention to the open arm that you see here, because that, to me, that's what Nicolaas Tulp said, to me, is the most important thing. Another reason why this is so odd is that normally the standard operating procedure for an anatomy lesson in those days was opening the abdomen first to get all the gory stuff out, you know, the stuff that starts to smell. And this was a smelly business anyway, so they only did this in winter. So they would take out the intestines and then would start with the rest of the body, and the arms would come on days 3, 4, 5, whatever, but not on the first day. You wouldn't start with that. But Nicolaas Tulp wanted to start with the opened arm. And the reason for that is clear when you follow the gaze of this guy here, because he's not looking at the arm, he is looking at the book. And that's the book that you see here in the corner. So if I zoom out, you see that there's a huge book in the corner. And this book is a medical book written by Andreas Vesalius, a guy who was an illustrious doctor in the 16th century, so the century prior to this one. And his books were study material for all these surgeons. So they knew these books by heart. And in one of these books, Vesalius, the doctor who had written the books, was depicted with an opened arm. And this opened arm is now repeated here by Dr. Nicolaas Tulp, who is actually teaching all these surgeons by, you know, when I lift these ligaments, the hand does like this. So he is just showing what happens when he lifts the ligaments or tendons. I never remember which ones they are, because for us it's all the same word. So I apologize to any medical personnel watching that I'm using the wrong term, but I can never remember which one it is. So here we have Dr. Nicolaas Tulp with that opened arm copying the behavior of this illustrious doctor here. And basically what he's doing with this painting is that he is showing that he's stepping in the footsteps of that illustrious doctor. So basically he is giving his business card here to all the people seeing this painting. And that weren't that many, because it was hung in the guild room. It was intended for the guild room of the surgeons. But nonetheless, all these surgeons would immediately recognize the message of this painting. And Rembrandt painted this in a very characteristic way of the Baroque. This is all about the Baroque 17th century art, is all about the moment that something is happening. So snapshotting when you enter. We have just entered when I close this. We just walked into this anatomy class. We just interrupted Dr. Nicolaas Tulp while he is teaching here. Because all these guys are doing something, and that's typically for students, of course. Not everybody is paying attention. This one is kind of gazing out. This one is looking at us, engaging us, and drawing us into the picture. You see that he's also holding a drawing of an arm. You also see here the signature of Rembrandt right in the background. And another thing that you see here very well is the fact that Rembrandt at first topped off this triangular composition, very dynamic composition, with a hat. But that had to be removed because Dr. Nicolaas Tulp said, I am the most important one, so I'm the only one wearing a hat. It also seems as if these guys are piggybacking, basically, or as if they're just on top of each other. But you have to bear in mind that this was an anatomical theater, so you have like a really steep seating, or they were actually standing. So you see that basically here he's on the top level, and then this one, and then these guys over here. So that gives Rembrandt this beautiful triangular composition. And also, of course, the strong working of light and darkness, the chiaroscuro, the contrast between light and dark. Because another thing that is very typical of these days is that they didn't have that many candles. So it was really, really dark in those houses. So you had to use, when you want to draw the attention of the viewer to something which is important, you have to light it up. And that's what he did. He lights up this body. He lights up this guy here, and he also lights up this page. So those are the elements that your eye is drawn towards to. There's also another thing that I cannot explain to you because I cannot do this, but there's something very specific. But if you want to know about that one, you really need to go on a trip with Tauck, because then the guides, my colleagues, will show you the final element of this painting.
We had one quick question on that one, Wendy, if you're able to answer it. The collar on the presenting doctor is different than the collars on the other doctors. Is that significant?
No, that's just fashion.
Okay.
This is a bit older color, like the millstone color. This is a more a modern one that you see here. You see that the very thick one, they become smaller and smaller and smaller, and this is a very fashionable one. But he was incredibly wealthy. He was mayor of Amsterdam, I think 4 or 6 times. So he was really, really wealthy. And another interesting thing is that his name was not Tulip. He was called Nicolaas Pieterszoon. So that was his name. But because of the tulip mania, he added that element of tulip. He actually used that as a trademark. His carriage would have a tulip. There was this banner hanging outside of his office. He would have that was a tulip. So a few years later, this is painted in 1632, but in 1637, the whole tulip crash. You had this internet bubble avant la lettre, and he was stuck with this name, and of course he dropped it immediately. But in history, we all know him as Dr. Nicolaas Tulp, Tulip. So he is kind of stuck with this name, but that wasn't his real name. If there are no other important questions, then I'll just carry on.
Yep.
And I'm going to take you. Are there any questions, Justin, or not?
No, you can go ahead.
Then I go back to the main hall, and we'll just carry on into this room. So when I look around, you see the stairway again. And of course, the paintings that you see here, a number of them have been moved in the meantime, because we're a living museum. So sometimes we change what is there, but the permanent collection will be always the girl with the pearl earring, the anatomy lesson, the bull of Potter that I'm going to show you now, and of course the painting by Jan Steen that we'll see in a second as well. Okay, this is, as you can see, I'm just going to zoom out. And you see that it is a beautiful, large room. It is basically, it is the room above the golden room that we just were downstairs. There's also a ceiling painting here, which does not belong here, but was added from another house. But I want to show you this enormous painting of just a bull. And that is something which was quite extraordinary. Foreign visitors thought it was just so silly for us to create a painting so large with a theme so ordinary. And usually these canvases, these sizes of canvases were only used for biblical scenes or mythological scenes or battle scenes, a grand subject, and not just a bull. But in the Netherlands, that was quite ordinary. I'll just show you the other animal pieces that you see here, for instance, quite large as well. So that is something which is quite common, and that has to do with the fact that in the 17th century there were all these different genres. So before that, before Protestantism, you had, of course, predominantly religious scenes, the altar pieces, and all these religious subjects next to the portraits. But in the 17th century, in the Netherlands, in the Dutch Republic, people become so incredibly wealthy that they have more to spend. They can build stone houses. So along the whole society, everybody becomes more wealthy. We used to call this the golden age, but of course it wasn't golden for everybody, but we still use the term when we talk about the golden age in painting, because that's certainly what it was, because there was such a high demand for paintings that about between 5 to 8 million paintings were painted. So that's an enormous amount of paintings. And of course, they weren't all painted by Rembrandt and like the real important and famous painters, but everybody could afford a painting. Well, almost everybody. Even a simple craftsman could buy a painting. And of course, it wouldn't be a Rembrandt, but it would still be a painting in order to decorate his house. And they also commissioned paintings. And in terms of commissioning, we don't know exactly who commissioned this painting, but we do know that Paulus Potter is actually has enlarged this painting. And I don't know whether you can actually see that, because when you're standing in front of it, I think it's better visible. But here you see a line going up, and then across here, sort of here, and then down again somewhere about here. But you see it best here. You see a bit here, next to the cow dung, that's where the line goes up. So he set out with a much smaller painting, just encompassing this bull. But then he probably heard somewhere in the grapevine that there might have been a customer for a larger piece. So therefore he decided to add canvas to the already existing painting. I don't know in what stage the painting exactly was, but he was able to make it like transition very smoothly. The fact that we see that now is just simply because of, the fading of the paint over time, but it was invisible at the time when he created the painting. So he added all this entourage around it. So you have here another cow, bull, you see 2 sheep and a ram here, you see the farmer, 2 trees, and you see a landscape. And of course the cow dung and the frog, because you're looking at it from a frog's perspective, and that's why he added the frog here. But when you look closely at the bull, you see that it's kind of floating here, especially with the hooves. It's not actually touching the ground. But even more interesting is that in those days, they did not paint in the open air yet. paint tubes were not invented until the Impressionist day. So we're talking about mid-19th century. So what you see here is a painting that completely came about in a workshop. He sketched outside. So what he did, he never left home without a sketchbook, as his wife always said. So when they went out for walks, he took out his sketchbook and he started to sketch all the bulls that he came, which he passed along the way. And then once back in his workshop, he would pin them against the wall. And then he would say, okay, I like that back end. I like that middle part. I like the front. I like the teeth. I like the horns. So he added all these different parts of that bull together into one bull. So when you're from an agricultural background, you will probably notice that this part is much smoother than this part here, because this is from a younger bull. So it's a completely composed bull. It's like photoshopping, but then 17th century photoshopping. Also, we recognize in this spire here, the church of Rijswijk, which is a little town just, well, now it's kind of grown together, but it's a little town just near The Hague. But when you come here with your travels, you will notice that we're just as flat as a pancake. So an elevation that you see here, which is suggested, is not there. So again, a photoshopping, because we know that he painted it here in The Hague, and he could actually see the spire there from his workshop. So we have kind of all these existing elements, but they use that all together. So it's hardly ever geographically correct, but it's still a typical Dutch landscape. And that is something that was appreciated by many collectors. Another photoshopping thing is that you see here two types of trees, an oak and a willow, and that's something that two trees that don't grow in the same soil. So that's something that he photoshopped as well. And then finally, I want to draw your attention to the incredible detail. Whenever I'm standing there, I always expect to get an experience like the night in the museum, you know, that film that, you know, they just get up and they start going through the museum. And every morning, the museum guards have to clear away the cow dung that they've left. So incredibly well done. I feel the breeze of the breathing of the cow when I put my hand in the vicinity, not against the painting, of course, but close to it. So very well done. Okay, then I'm going to go to the next room, which is the room over here. So basically, I'm going to walk out here, back to the hallway, and then enter this room. And then I'll just refer to, I have two choices. How much time? I still have 10 minutes, Dustin?
We've got 10 minutes, but I mean, if you can go over if you'd like, if guests want to stay with us.
Okay, yeah, sure. Because of course I want to end with the girl with the pearl earring, but I want to briefly say something about these two paintings, this one here, and of course the goldfinch, because this is a painting that I can talk very extensively about because there's so much going on here. This is a painting by Jan Steen, and I'll just press this information button so you can just quickly see that. As the old sing, so pipe the young, third quarter of the 17th century. And I'm just going to close that so we can go back to the painting. There's a lot going on here. Basically, I always call this the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of the 17th century. The drugs, of course, I mean this here. The fact that this father is actually teaching his kid how to smoke a pipe, which in those days was something that it was a bad example. They're basically setting the bad example here, but he's enjoying himself tremendously here because he knows what will happen when this little boy will start to inhale the smoke. And his sister is looking kind of at us, but also looking at him. And she's laughing because she also knows that it will end up in a lot of coughing and, him maybe being sick. So it's very humorous here. It's very funny to have a look at this scene here. So this is, to me, the drugs. The rock and roll is expressed here by the lady who's leaning backwards. She's already tipsy when you look at her face. She has these rosy cheeks. She's leaning backwards. She has her shirt open. Her bodice is kind of loose, and she's holding up this glass, which is filled with wine, beautifully detailed as well. And I always mockingly say this is Tom Cruise because it reminds me of Tom Cruise in Cocktail, that he's just spinning the glass here. But of course, he doesn't really look like Tom Cruise because he has much longer hair. So, but it's like the 17th century Tom Cruise. And then the final part, of course, the sex. And that's where you have to zoom in on this here. Because what you see here is the Viagra of the 17th century. These are oysters, and oysters are an aphrodisiacum. It's something that, arouses your, well, I don't have to explain that. So this is like the sex, drug, and rock and roll of the 17th century. And this is all a very merry company. And the reason why they are merry is because of the baby that is here on the lap of the lady in the background, because they're celebrating the birth of a baby. This is basically a baby shower, because the hat that the old man here is wearing is a hat that has to be worn by the father, but he's too busy teaching his other son how to smoke. The reference also, so that's the occasion of this merry company, but the whole message here is that don't try this at home. Don't set the bad example. As the old pipe, so sing the young. Zo voorgezongen, zo nagepepen. That is what it says in Dutch. And that's the reference to the fact that all these adults here are setting the bad example. Too much drinking, too much smoking, and maybe too much sex. And the copying elements are the parrot and the bagpipe. Because as the old sing, so pipe the young, and piping is expressed by this boy playing the bagpipes. And of course, we know that a parrot always copies what you say. So that's the whole painting by Jan Steen. Then we just quickly move to the goldfinch here, which is, as you can see, a relatively small painting, but has become very famous because of Donna Tartt's book, The Goldfinch. And maybe when you are living in New York, maybe you've seen this painting at the Frick collection. And that was the year that we were under reconstruction, because we have had a large renovation of about 2 years in 2014. And then some of our works actually went to the Frick collection, and amongst which was the girl with the pearl earring, but also this goldfinch. And that same year, Donna Tartt was giving the Pulitzer Prize for her book, The Goldfinch. And we were kind of very pleased when we got this painting back again, because we were hoping that it wasn't going to be like a repetition of what she described in the book, because this is the subject of her book, because it's been stolen from the rubble of the museum, which was damaged by a large explosion. And from there on, the whole story develops. The whole idea for that start of the book, she got from what happened for real with this painting, as far as we can deduce now, because it was painted, as you can see, by Karel Fabricius. I'm just trying to figure out how I can show you this without the, here you see Karel Fabricius. And Karel Fabricius was a student of Rembrandt, and he painted this in 1654. In 1654, there was also a large gunpowder depot explosion in Delft, where he lived. He only lived a block away from the gunpowder depot, and it exploded. 90 tons of gunpowder exploded, destroying a large part of the city of Delft, including the workshop Karel Fabricius, including himself. So he ended up dead, and according to the stories, this painting was actually found in the debris of his workshop. So that's where the plot comes from the book of Donatart. It is a very simple painting in a sense. It is what we call a trompe-l'œil. It's an eye-deceiving image, because you have to bear in mind, or you have to realize that in those days, people would have a goldfinch just like that as a pet in the house. That's how you would see it. This is how you would find it, with the bird sitting on this rail. It's attached to the rail with this small chain that you see here. It's chained to his foot, and here to the railing. In this box, which they could open, there you find food, but they also were capable of drawing water from a reservoir, which was just out of reach. And in this case, you don't see any of this, but we know that they could do this because the nickname for this bird is putter and puttertje, and that's the Dutch word for it, but it has nothing to do with the type of bird, because it's a goldfinch, but it's the fact that he could actually get water from a little reservoir using a little chain with a little bucket, like a thimble-sized bucket, and that's something that these birds could do. So it was quite common in households to have a bird like this as a pet, and the idea was that when you would see this along the wall, you would for a second, and especially the 17th century viewer, would be thrown off his feet, thinking at first that he actually saw this bird, because you see the beautiful shadow here. When you zoom in, you see that it has a very thick layer of paint here, with which Fabricius scratched with the back of his pen, of his brush, in the layer of paint, creating this wing. So it's quite detailed, but also it looks very realistic, and you would be fooled by seeing this bird on a painting, but at first you would think it's real. So that's the whole function of this this painting, that it's deceiving your eye. And it's quite interesting in that sense. If you ask me which painting I would take if I could nick something from the Mauritshuis, it wouldn't be this one, but it would rather be another one, and that one is what you see over here, and that's the painting by Judith Leister, a female painter in our collection. But I'm going to take you finally to another woman of our collection, and the most famous one. And I hope I'm not kind of disappointing you now by showing her, because it's like the Mona Lisa effect. You always think it's bigger than it is, but it's actually not that big, but it's not really small either, because we have smaller paintings flanking it.
Hey,
But
Wendy, just a quick interruption. So Wendy's going to speak to this painting now, but just a reminder for folks who may have to jump off, this is being recorded and will be available to you tomorrow afternoon. So you can skip ahead to this part if you'd like, as Wendy talks through it now.
Okay. Thank you, Dustin. I'm just finishing this tour by discussing the girl with the pearl earring, and I'm going to, of course, use the zoom in order to get closer to her. And again, we have here the infrared image that brings you to the girl even underneath. We also have a beautiful blog on our website of the Mauritshuis, a girl with a blog, and there you can find all kinds of information about the recent research that has been done on this painting. So maybe we can add that as well. Jacqueline, could you send Dustin the link to Girl with the Blog? Do that? The Girl with the Blog. Yeah. Okay, so Justin, you will get another link, and maybe you can add that on the in the chat at the end. Jacqueline will take care of that.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yep, that works.
Okay, going back to the painting itself, you see here this extremely beautiful girl. It's, you know, of course, I'm prejudiced. I think this is one of the most beautiful paintings there is. But on the other hand, as I said, if you know, she's so famous that it kind of is difficult to see her with, you know, unprejudiced eyes, people who've never seen her, because I've seen her so often. But nonetheless, I'm always impressed by the way that Vermeer actually plays with the light in this painting. And it's just breathtaking what he does. And then to think that it's just sheer observation that he creates such almost photographic image of this girl that it always takes my breath away. And one of the, I'm just going to take you through this painting, referring to that use of light here. Of course, the chiaroscuro, the light darkness, you know, he used this darker background, which actually is green. And we also know that here there used to be a curtain, a green curtain, but that's something that you can not see anymore. But in the blog, you will find more information on that as well. But what he does is that he, you know, in the 17th century, the light almost always comes from the top left-hand corner. And that simply is also because most of the painters were right-handed. So you start at the top and you just go down, and then it will prevent your hand from smudging all the paint. So it's just a practical thing as well. So here you see that she's actually lit from the top left-hand corner. I hope I'm not suggesting the wrong way, but I mean the top left-hand corner. And you see that her face is turned away or towards us, lighting her face in this way and casting a shadow here on the right-hand side of her face. And he creates that by applying all these different layers of paint. And basically, this is what it is. It is just layers of paint, because I'm going to zoom in now and I'm going to focus on her nose. And when you look at this painting from afar, like you do now, you see the whole painting. You see that this is a nose, but you just wonder, how did he paint that nose? Well, with paint, I'm just using shadows and darker and lighter paint. So the closer I get to this nose, the less it looks like a nose. And then all of a sudden you see that this is just a brownish, grayish blob of paint. And when I get closer, it is just, you know, a brush stroke, more or less, with a bit of darker here, because this is, you know, her nostrils. And this is what it is. But of course, you're not supposed to sit on it this closely, and you're not supposed to do that in the Mauritshuis either when you come and visit us. But this is one of the perks of this application. But when you zoom out, you slowly see that it actually becomes a nose. So this is how these paintings work. You know, it's just by building up layer after layer after layer after layer of paint, creating and molding with paint the subject that you want to paint. Also, playing with the light. Here you see in her mouth a bit of just a dash of white paint. Here also just a brush stroke, really light on her lips. You see here this white dot in the corner of her mouth. You see the highlights in her eyes. You see the large dot, as if he had been waiting for you know, seconds or maybe hours for the drop of paint to drop on the pearl, and also the reflection in the pearl of the color here, because then, you know, here you see a bit of gray shadow, and then all of a sudden the bright white catches the light again and reflects on the bottom of the pearl. So you see highlights everywhere, but also on the headdress that she's wearing. Here you see the light on top of the headdress, and you see that it's lighter blue, and he adds a bit of gray, black here to the side, and it's like a ragged line, because it's not, you know, it's not a straight line, a difference between the lighter part and the darker part. But when you put the scarf out on the floor, it will be equally blue everywhere. So it is something that is a clear example of the way that the light is shining on top of her head and catching the shadow here on this side. Also, when you look at her face here, you see that there's like a lightning bolt shape. Here you see the gray from her hairline towards the corner of her eye, then towards her temple, and then across the cheek down to her chin. And he adds more gray exactly on the spot where we women would put our blush, because we want to make our cheeks stick out. And that's what he does. So he adds a bit of dark here, and therefore by simply adding the darker colors, which is he molds this face. And this is something that painters have been aware of for centuries. You know that darker colors recede and the brighter colors jump towards the front. So this is how he creates this, by simply moving from light to extremely dark and then lighter again, creating this cheekbone effect. Finally, this is not a portrait. This is what we call a tronie. Maybe you've seen the film based on the book by Tracy Chevalier, The Girl with the Pearl Earring, with the famous film with Colin Firth and Scarlett Johansson. And it suggested that Vermeer actually painted his maid, but that's not the case. He did not paint his maid. He did not paint her portrait. Maybe she has sat for him as a model, but it could just as well been his wife, his sister, his mother, his neighbor, whatever woman was around to sit for him as a model. He never intended to paint them as a portrait, because if he had intended it to be a portrait, she would not have sit in this snapshot kind of position, because when you have your portrait made, you would be sitting either in a frontal position or in a profile position or in a three-quarter position, and not looking over your shoulder as if something has happened. It is very similar to the scene that we saw with the anatomy lesson. We are interrupting something, and also here she's doing her chores and somebody calls her name. She looks up over her shoulder and she moistens her lips and she's about to speak. That is what we see here. So this is also, it's not a portrait, but also he intended it to be a characteristic, an archetype. This is an exotic girl because she's wearing this turban. Nobody in the Netherlands, in the Dutch Republic, would wear a turban unless you were from that area, from far away countries, far away from the Dutch Republic. But then you would have a physiognomy that would be matching with where you came from and wearing your headdress and the whole outfit. But this is just a Dutch girl. She's wearing a Dutch jacket, but she's wearing this turban here. And of course, this huge pearl. So what he intended to paint here is a tronie in a Turkish way. That is the title of the painting, which it used to have. And what he intended to say, or what he meant by Turkish way, everything east of Greece. Basically, that was very general, of course, because there's like a zillion countries and a zillion cultures east of Greece. But he just referred to that as a Turkish way. So that's what it is. It is a tronie, and a tronie is a Dutch word, but that entered into the English language as well. So that's what it is. It's not a portrait, it's a tronie. It's a archetypical girl, like the laughing boy or the merry drinker, that kind of thing. And it's one of the few paintings that Vermeer painted, and we actually have 3 Vermeers, which is quite a lot because he painted about 35 paintings. So we have 3 of them here. We have Diana and her nymphs, as you can see here, and also on the other side of the room, the view on Delft. So this concludes my tour through the Mauritshuis. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope I've given you enough inspiration to come and book that trip with Tauck Travel, so you can come and visit us for real. And if there are no more questions, I'll just stop sharing my screen. And I think
I did that for you, Wendy. There was a couple more questions on the girl with the pearl earring, but hopefully you wouldn't mind answering those for us after the fact, and we will get them up onto the blog page where this video will be tomorrow afternoon. So those of you who had those questions can go look at the blog page and see Wendy's answers. There's just a few, Wendy, so there's not a ton, but hopefully you can do that for us.
No problem whatsoever. Thank you again for inviting us.
Great. So just one quick thing to close here. So you can visit the Mauritshuis Museum with us on 2 of our river cruises, cruising the Dutch waterways and Holland and Belgium in spring. If you are super adventurous, we do have a couple departures still available for this month, if you'd like to get out there and book. If not, plenty of departures for the fall on cruising the Dutch waterways, and obviously next year as well. So thank you again to everyone who joined. Thank you so much, Wendy, for your wealth of knowledge and this technology, which is amazing. And we'll get some more information up onto the blog page with the video recording at some point tomorrow afternoon. You will all be notified via email when it's ready to go. Thanks again. We appreciate your time.
Okay, bye-bye.